The Night Shift Nightmare. The old Victorian house loomed before me, its weathered facade a grim harbinger of the horrors that awaited within. As I approached the front door, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the knocker, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far beyond my experience as a direct care aide. It was supposed to be a simple overnight shift, just watching over Martha, a 65-year-old woman with dementia, while her daughter Colleen worked. I had done this kind of work before. Or so I thought. But nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare that was about to unfold. Colleen greeted me at the door, her eyes dark-rimmed and weary. As she ushered me inside, the house seemed to close in around us, the air thick with the musty scent of decay and something else, something I couldn't quite place but that set my nerves on edge. Martha can get confused at night, Colleen explained, her voice barely above a whisper. She might wander. Just guide her back to bed if that happens. Quote. I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. As Colleen introduced me to Martha, the old woman's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I swore I saw something flicker behind them. Something cold and calculating that didn't belong in the gaze of a woman suffering from dementia. But then Martha smiled, the moment passed, and I dismissed it as my imagination running wild. As night fell and Colleen left for work, I settled into the living room, trying to focus on the TV show I had pulled up on my phone. But the house seemed to resist any attempt at normalcy. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, and every creak of the old structure sent a shiver down my spine. It was nearing midnight when I first heard it, the slow, methodical thud of footsteps from upstairs. My heart racing, I called out Martha's name, receiving only silence in response. As I approached the stairs, the footsteps retreated, a door closing softly in the darkness above. Unnerved but determined to do my job, I returned to the living room. But the peace was short-lived. An hour later, as I was retrieving a sandwich from the kitchen, a figure materialized in the doorway, nearly causing me to drop my plate in shock. It was Martha, her white nightgown ghostly in the dim light, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice rising to a scream. "Why are you here?" I tried to calm her, explaining who I was, but my words seemed to wash over her like water on stone. It took all my persuasive skills to guide her back to bed, plying her with water and melatonin in the hopes of settling her for the night. Exhausted, I retreated to the spare bedroom Colleen had offered for my use. Sleep came quickly, but it was far from restful. Nightmares plagued me. Visions of Martha standing over my bed, her eyes glowing with an unholy light, her hands reaching for my throat. I jolted awake to a sound that chilled me to my very core, a rhythmic slamming coming from downstairs. Gathering what little courage I had left, I crept down the stairs. My heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The scene that greeted me in the kitchen was like something out of a horror movie. Martha stood before the open oven, repeatedly slamming the door shut with inhuman strength. The sound echoed through the house like a death knell, each impact sending vibrations through the floor beneath my feet. "Martha?" I called out, my voice trembling. She turned, her movements jerky and unnatural, and began walking towards me. In the dim light, her face was a mask of emptiness, devoid of any recognition or humanity. As she brushed past me to climb the stairs, I could have sworn I heard her mutter something. Words in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and ancient. I followed her back to her room, watching in mounting horror as she stood facing the wall, as still as a statue. It took all my willpower to approach her, to gently guide her back to bed. As I tucked her in, her hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. For a moment, her eyes cleared, and she looked at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice suddenly lucid. "They're always coming." Before I could respond, her eyes glazed over once more, and she released my wrist, settling back into the bed as if nothing had happened. Shaken to my core, I retreated to the spare room once more. Sleep eluded me as I lay there, every sound in the old house magnified in my heightened state of fear. Just as exhaustion began to overtake me, A new sound jolted me back to full alertness, the soft creak of the closet door opening. My eyes flew open, darting to the source of the noise. There, peeking out from the partially open closet door, was a dark shape, the unmistakable silhouette of a human head. "Martha?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is that you?" No response came. Instead, the door slowly swung open wider, revealing Martha's full form. But something was wrong. Her movements were too fluid, too purposeful for someone in the grips of dementia. And in her hand, glinting in the faint light filtering through the window, was a large kitchen knife. "Who are you?" she demanded once more, her voice now a guttural growl that barely sounded human. "I don't know you." Panic surged through me as I realized the true danger of my situation. This was no confused old woman. This was something else entirely, something dangerous and possibly not even human. I screamed at her to put the knife down, but my words only seemed to enrage her further. She lunged forward, the knife slashing through the air where I had been just moments before. I dove off the bed, narrowly avoiding her attack, and made a desperate dash for the door. Martha's inhuman shrieks followed me as I flew down the stairs, pausing only long enough to grab my shoes before bursting out of the front door into the cool night air. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, calling Colleen as instructed. But even as I relayed the terrifying events to Colleen, a part of me knew that this was far from over. As I waited for her to arrive, keeping a wary eye on the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been wearing Martha's face was still watching me, biding its time. When Colleen finally arrived, rushing into the house to check on her mother, I half expected to hear screams of terror. Instead, she emerged minutes later, confusion and anger etched on her face. "She's sleeping peacefully," Colleen snapped. "What kind of game are you playing?" It wasn't until she found the knife by Martha's bedside that the color drained from her face. But even then, she seemed more concerned with covering up the incident than addressing the supernatural horror we had both glimpsed. I left that night, vowing never to return. But the memory of Martha's empty eyes and inhuman strength haunts me still. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear the rhythmic slamming of an oven door, and I wonder, what really lurks behind the facade of that old Victorian house? And how many other unsuspecting caretakers have fallen victim to its dark secrets? The plumber's peril. The address seemed innocent enough on paper, just another suburban home in need of a simple plumbing repair. But as I pulled up to the dilapidated structure on that fateful day, my first as a plumber for a small local company, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The house stood apart from its neighbors, an island of decay in a sea of well-maintained lawns. Paint peeled from its weathered siding in long strips, like flesh sloughing off a corpse. Windows, clouded with years of grime, stared out at the world like sightless eyes. As I approached the front door, tools in hand, the floorboards of the porch creaked ominously beneath my feet. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could make contact, the door swung open of its own accord. The man who stood before me defied description. His face seemed to shift and warp as I looked at him, features never quite settling into a cohesive whole. But it was his smile that truly chilled me to the bone, too wide. Too many teeth, stretching from ear to ear in a grotesque parody of friendliness. "Welcome," he said, his voice a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. "I've been expecting you." Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. Had he really been expecting me? Or had he been waiting for anyone unfortunate enough to cross his threshold? I followed him into the house, my unease growing with each step. The interior was barren, devoid of furniture or any signs of habitation. Our footsteps echoed hollowly in the empty rooms, stirring up dust that danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. "Just moved in," the man explained with that unnerving giggle, as if reading my thoughts. But nothing about this place suggested recent occupancy. It felt abandoned, forgotten by time itself. In the kitchen, I set my tools down and bent to examine the sink, desperate for some semblance of normalcy in this increasingly bizarre situation. But as I slid under the cabinet, I felt it, the unmistakable presence of the man looming over me. His legs spread wide on either side of my prone form. Panic clawed at my throat as I asked him to give me space. He shuffled back, but not nearly far enough. As I emerged from under the sink, I realized with growing horror that there was no water running through the pipes at all. "Must have shut off the main valve by mistake," the man said, that impossible smile never wavering. "I'll go turn it back on." But instead of heading to the basement or outside where any sane person would keep their main water valve, he turned and ascended the stairs. The sound of his footsteps overhead sent shivers down my spine. And then, a new sound, multiple sets of feet, moving rapidly, coming down the stairs. In that moment, survival instinct overrode any sense of professional duty. I grabbed my tools and bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my ears. As I threw myself into my van, I caught a glimpse of movement in one of the upstairs windows. A pale face pressed against the glass, watching me with hungry eyes. I peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind me as I fled. It wasn't until I was miles away that I dared to slow down, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call my boss. But even as I reported the incident as a prank gone wrong, I knew the truth. Whatever awaited me in that house was far more sinister than a simple joke. The vacant, hungry eyes that had watched me from that window spoke of an appetite that could never be satisfied, a darkness that consumed all who dared to enter its domain. In the days that followed, I learned the truth about that house, long abandoned, a magnet for urban legends and whispered tales of disappearances. The number that had called for service was untraceable, a phantom in the system. I quit that job soon after, unable to shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse than a simple home repair gone wrong. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that high-pitched giggle echoing in the darkness of my room. And I wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed just a moment longer? What horrors awaited me in the depths of that forsaken house? The delivery from hell. The neon Domino's sign flickered weakly in the gathering darkness, a beacon of normalcy in a night that would soon spiral into unimaginable horror. It was my first shift as a delivery driver, a simple job to help pay for college supplies. Little did I know that this mundane task would lead me into the heart of a nightmare. The order seemed innocent enough: 4 large pizzas and 2 bottles of soda. Destined for an address on the outskirts of town. As my manager, another trainee, and I piled into my car, the atmosphere was light, filled with the nervous excitement of a new job. But as we drove further from the familiar streets of our small town, that excitement gave way to a growing sense of unease. The road stretched before us, a black ribbon cutting through the wilderness, each mile taking us further from safety and deeper into unknown territory. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at our destination. The house that loomed before us was a decrepit monstrosity, its weathered boards and boarded-up windows a silent testament to years of neglect. The air around it seemed heavier somehow, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As we approached the front door, the other trainee's voice shook as he pointed out a face watching us from an upstairs window, there for a moment, then gone in a blink. My manager brushed it off as paranoia. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The porch steps creaked ominously under our weight as my manager pounded on the door. Silence greeted us, broken only by the sound of our own increasingly panicked breathing. And then, carried on the night breeze, came a smell, the unmistakable stench of decay, as if something had died within the walls of this godforsaken place. Just as we were about to give up and flee, the door creaked open. A man's face appeared in the gap. Wizened and pale, his eyes glinting with an unsettling light in the darkness. He beckoned us inside with a gnarled hand, his friendly demeanor at odds with the oppressive atmosphere of the house. As my manager handed over the receipt, I couldn't help but glance around the interior. The emptiness that greeted me was more unsettling than any clutter could have been. No furniture, no decorations, just bare floors and a few scattered blankets. This wasn't a home, it was a hollow shell, waiting to be filled with unspeakable horrors. The old man shuffled away to retrieve payment, leaving us alone in the yawning void of the entryway. That's when we heard it. Footsteps from above, multiple sets, moving with purpose. The other trainee's earlier observation suddenly seemed far less like paranoia and much more like a premonition of doom. My manager, ever the professional, called out to the old man. But his words were met with a silence so complete it seemed to swallow all sound. And then, a new noise, footsteps from below. As if something was ascending from depths we couldn't begin to fathom. Panic clawed at my throat as my manager decided to investigate, instructing us to stay put. We watched him disappear around the side of the house, our hearts pounding in unison as we waited for his return. The scream that shattered the night will haunt my dreams for years to come. My manager came tearing around the corner, his face a mask of terror, yelling for us to get in the car. We didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions. We ran as if the hounds of hell were nipping at our heels. As we peeled away from that house of horrors, my manager's words turned my blood to ice. He had stumbled upon a group in the backyard, gathered around a small fire. But it wasn't the fire that had inspired such terror, it was what lay at its center. A baby deer, still alive, surrounded by laughing figures whose very presence seemed to warp the air around them. We had stumbled upon something ancient and evil, a ritual that was never meant for mortal eyes. The realization that we had narrowly escaped becoming part of that ritual ourselves was almost too much to bear. In the days that followed, we all quit our jobs at Domino's. The manager held out a bit longer, but eventually, the weight of what he had witnessed proved too much for him as well. We tried to report what we had seen to the authorities, but our story was dismissed as the overactive imaginations of teenagers spinning urban legends. But we know the truth. Something dark and hungry lurks on the outskirts of our town, wearing the skin of normalcy but concealing horrors beyond imagination. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear distant laughter carried on the breeze, a sound that chills me to my very soul. I never took another delivery job after that night. The open road, once a symbol of freedom, now represents only terror and the unknown. And every time I see a Domino's delivery car speed past, I say a silent prayer for the driver, hoping they never find themselves on that lonely road, approaching a house where evil waits with open arms and hungry eyes. These experiences have left an indelible mark on my psyche, a constant reminder that sometimes the most mundane jobs can lead us into the heart of darkness. Whether it's caring for the elderly, fixing a leaky pipe, or delivering a simple pizza, danger can lurk behind the most innocent of facades. The night shift with Martha taught me that not all monsters wear obvious masks. Sometimes they come in the form of confused elderly women, their minds twisted by forces beyond our understanding. The abandoned house showed me that evil,